We're seeing some movement in the case of Jocelyn Nungaray, the 12-year-old Houston girl who left home one evening last summer and never returned. Prosecutors say Jocelyn was murdered, strangled to death by two illegal immigrants, and now they both face the death penalty. At the same time, Jocelyn's case has become politically charged, her own mother testifying at a Senate hearing just this month in support of bail reform for immigrants charged with a crime. But the bottom line is Jocelyn's case is heartbreaking, no matter what side of the aisle you're on. We're taking a closer look at it now and all the latest updates, plus what's ahead for her case. First, let's start with Jocelyn. She was 12 years old, living in Houston with her mother, Alexis Nungaray, and her brother. On June 16th of last year, Jocelyn went into her bedroom, but instead of going to sleep, she snuck outside. Now, something I have to add here. Commenters on some of our past videos about Jocelyn's case have accused us of victim-shaming Jocelyn by reporting on this. Let's be very clear here. This 12-year-old girl did not deserve what happened to her. It's absolutely inexcusable and deplorable. But it is part of the story that Jocelyn snuck out. That's just what happened. So around midnight on June 17th, Jocelyn made her way to a nearby 7-Eleven. She's caught on security camera video here too, both alone and with two other male suspects. Prosecutors now say those men are 21-year-old Johan Jose Martinez Rangel and 26-year-old Franklin Peña. And it's that security camera video that led to their arrest.
We were able to find video and trace the movements of our suspects and of Jocelyn, and all the way to the point of where she was murdered and left in a bayou in the water.
According to the video, the suspects first met up with Jocelyn near the 7-Eleven, and it's caught on camera. Jocelyn was on the phone with her boyfriend during all of this, and he later told investigators that he overheard her speaking with some men.
Suspects seen meeting the victim and talking for a few minutes while they were on Kirkendall. Later, the suspects and the victim walked together to a convenience store.
Shortly after the trio is seen on camera at 7-Eleven, they're then seen leaving, heading toward a nearby bridge.
After a few minutes, all three together walked to a bridge where ultimately Jocelyn was murdered.
According to prosecutors, both suspects spent hours under the bridge. They allegedly tied up Jocelyn and sexually assaulted her before she was strangled to death. A woman taking her husband to work first noticed Jocelyn later that morning and reported it to police. When investigators found Jocelyn's body, she wasn't wearing any pants. Officials say after sexually assaulting Jocelyn and murdering her, both men left her behind and walked away from the scene.
Suspects continue south towards their residence after leaving Jocelyn there.
After Jocelyn's death, these security camera images were posted on social media and they aired on local TV stations, asking that anyone with more information or anyone who recognized these people come forward, and that's just what happened. The roommate of Rangel, Martinez, and Peña said he was watching TV with them both when a news report about Jocelyn's murder came on. The report showed these surveillance video screenshots of both suspects, and the roommate recognized them immediately. He told investigators he tried not to react and made an excuse to leave, and that's when he called police. This roommate told investigators he was with both of the suspects before Jocelyn's murder. They were out grabbing some drinks. But the roommate says he left before these two suspects went to 7-Eleven and first met up with Jocelyn. Around the same time as this info came in from the roommate, Peña's boss went to the Houston Police Department headquarters to report Peña had confessed the crime to him. The boss says he was giving Peña a ride home when Peña said he made a mistake after partying and that he hurt someone. The boss says he connected the dots when he saw the security camera screenshots and recognized Peña. On June 20th, both men were arrested at their apartment building. Investigators noted Martinez Rangel had bite marks and scratches up and down his arms when he was taken into custody. After that, both men started talking, and they both had different stories. According to Peña's story, he's saying he was an accomplice, and Martinez Rangel was the principal. Peña says after leaving the restaurant and bar, he and Martinez Rangel ran into Jocelyn. Court docs state, quote, Johan asked JN for directions to get back to their apartment. In the legal documents, Jocelyn is only identified as her initials JN. Now, Peña told investigators that as they were walking westbound on Rankin Road, he kissed JN on the lips. But things only got worse. Peña says he saw Johan, who was behind JN, wrap his forearm around her neck. Johan kept his forearm around the complainant's neck and walked her to the area under the bridge. Franklin stated that he saw Johan put JN onto her back. While she was on the ground, Johan took off Jan's pants and then climbed on top of her while holding her arms down over her head. Peña says he told Johan to stop and that they should leave. However, Johan told him, "I have to finish what I started." That's when Peña observed Johan wrap his forearm around Jan's neck again and cover her mouth with his hand. Franklin stated that he observed that Jan was deceased and that Johan tied her hands and feet together. Hey, by the way, I know we have a lot of sponsors on Law and Crime, and we appreciate you supporting them and supporting us. But we'd really like to know from all of you, what do you like? We created a 5-question survey that takes less than 30 seconds to fill out. You tell us what kind of brands and products you use so we can make sure to put the right companies in front of you. There's some incentive in all of this too. If you fill out the survey as a thank you, we will randomly select 5 of you and send you free Law and Crime t-shirts. So please fill out our survey at lawandcrime.com/survey. Again, it takes less than 30 seconds and you could get some free Law and Crime merch. When detectives spoke to Martinez Rangel, he pointed the finger back at Peña. According to court documents, initially, he distanced himself from the commission of the murder and claimed that Franklin was solely responsible. Detectives stopped the interview at this point, but Martinez Rangel reinitiated the conversation, at which time he admitted that he was the person who tied Jan's legs and then told Franklin to throw her body into the bayou because the water would wash off the DNA. But this part echoes what Peña told investigators, saying Johan then moved Jan into the water and said that no DNA would be found on the body due to the water. He also told investigators Martinez Rangel shaved his beard in an effort not to be recognized when news of Jocelyn's murder broke. Both men were ultimately charged with capital murder. Bond has been set at $10 million each, plus an immigration hold. That's because both men are undocumented migrants from Venezuela, and they had both been arrested even prior to Jocelyn's murder. That's another reason why the case has been so divisive. Jocelyn's mother, Jocelyn Nungaray, even followed now President Donald Trump on his campaign trail this fall to speak about illegal immigration. Just this month, she spoke about it at a Senate hearing 2 in Texas's state capital of Austin. She testified in support of Senate Joint Resolution 1 that was authored by Houston Republican Senator Joan Huffman. Now, the bill would amend the Texas Constitution and allow the state to deny bail to any person charged with a felony who entered the country illegally. That would even include people who moved here for work, school, or even just were traveling. According to HoustonLanding.org, Jocelyn's mother, Alexis, testified that it was inhumane going to a bail hearing for her daughter's alleged killers. She said, quote, "It's just not right. They already committed a crime being here illegally. And the fact that they can be part of a more heinous crime on American soil, they shouldn't be provided the opportunity to make bail." Jocelyn's mother has also been outspoken about the district attorney's decision to pursue the death penalty in this case. Back in December, former Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg announced death penalty was officially on the table for both defendants. According to Fox 26 Houston, Alexis said, quote, "If I'm being completely honest, it's a mixture of both. I want them to forever live in prison miserably, tormentedly, but I also do want death for them because they took the life of my child and she's no longer here anymore." After doing some thinking on it, I do think it fits the crime. It's an eye for an eye. And if they did not want to be eligible for the death penalty, they should have never done what they did and to who they did it to. Those are some pretty strong words there from Jocelyn's mom, and I want to talk about that, the case so far, what's next, everything involving all of it. So we've got to bring on our expert guest, that's criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Anthony Osso. And Anthony, the reason I want to talk to you today is you're right down there in Houston, probably pretty familiar with the case. What are the vibes down there with all of that?
Pretty serious. Obviously, anytime that the state files an intention to seek death, it's going to be buzz around the courthouse. It's got a lot of media attention for various reasons. Obviously, the facts of the case, as well as the immigration issues involved in the case. So it's definitely a lot of buzz down here in Houston about this case.
There's a lot of different lanes we can go down in this case because there is a lot happening. But if we just start with the basics, the fact that we have a 12-year-old girl who snuck out of her house, which honestly, most of us do as kids. And the worst that happens is we get grounded. I mean, you know, it's a normal, ordinary thing for a kid to do. And then she ends up in this horrific situation, murdered, sexually assaulted, her body left for someone else to find. I mean, that just rocks me to my very core. And the fact that this happened, you know, in an area that should normally be safe, is that what people are talking about a bit too?
Yes. I mean, the facts of this case are gruesome. And so anytime, you've got a crime against a child, and even more so a sexual assault that turns into a murder, that's definitely going to be what people are talking about. This was in the Greenspoint area of Houston, which isn't necessarily a safe area of town, but certainly people wouldn't expect for a 12-year-old that snuck out to ultimately be sexually assaulted and killed. So it's definitely, the facts are definitely something people are talking about down here in Houston.
And I think the facts are so shocking. We kind of went through them a bit there, and that could be the reason that led to the death penalty conversation. Is that right? The fact that we have a victim who's 12 years old, the way she was killed, and she was sexually assaulted, does that kind of bring up the conversation of death penalty?
I think it does. Obviously, as we move into the future and there's a little bit more progressive ideals, I think that jurisdictions are moving away from the death penalty, but on the scale of what kinds of cases jurisdictions will choose to seek death on here in Texas, this is definitely the type of case where you would see a prosecuting office seek death. So certainly the facts are a component at play in that decision by the DA's office.
So back when this happened in June, almost a year ago, I guess now, your then DA, Kim Ogg, said, we are thinking about the death penalty. We'll kind of keep you guys posted. And then in December announced that they were going to seek the death penalty. So in those couple of months, what would the discussions have looked like for the prosecution? Would they have reached out to Jocelyn's family? I know her mother has been a bit outspoken about the death penalty side of things. Would that have been a collaboration between the family and prosecutors kind of weighing the options?
Yes, it's a number of things, but you're right, Sierra. They're definitely going to talk to the family of the victim in this case and get their 2 cents. So there's a committee in Houston or in Harris County that will meet regarding cases like this, very serious capital murder type cases, and they'll look at a number of things, talking to the family, looking at the strength of the case, looking at the facts of the case and what the defendants are actually alleged to have done. And from time to time, they will have discussions with the defense attorneys before coming to that decision to either seek death or not seek death in capital murder cases.
Talking about capital murder too, we can talk about the death penalty as well, but capital murder a bit different from regular murder, if we're going to call it that. Why would that be the route that prosecutors took in this case?
Because in this case, you have the commission of a felony going on at the same time. And so, for instance, the way that they pled the case is in 2 forms: that they were kidnapping Jocelyn and then ultimately killed her during the process of doing so, and then that they were committing sexual assault of Jocelyn and ultimately committed murder in doing so. That is what aggravates the case from first-degree murder up to capital murder in Texas.
I'm glad you explained all of that there, because it sounds like what we were talking about a bit before, with one thing after another kind of compounding each other with all of the facts of the case. So it makes sense. As far as the death penalty, though, we talked about what the discussions may have looked like leading up to their decision and announcement that that's what's going to happen. But how does that change the case as it moves forward to trial? Is it different than an ordinary case when the defendants would face just life in prison?
Yes. Obviously, the stakes are extremely high for both the state and the defense. For the defense attorneys, they're representing someone, and ultimately the defendant's lives are in their hands. But it changes sort of the negotiation process that you would see in a first-degree murder, where the state might make an offer of prison time, the defense might counter that offer, and ultimately they come to a plea bargain agreement or they go to trial. In capital murder cases where the state's seeking death, a defendant doesn't plead guilty to capital murder and accept the death penalty. There is going to be a trial. So I imagine that the defense will probably try to look for mitigating circumstances about these defendants to put that in front of the state's face and maybe attempt to get them to come off seeking the death penalty. But it definitely raises the stakes.
What do you think is going to happen? Could the defense bring something so compelling that the state says, yeah, we're going to back off and we're not going to pursue death anymore?
That's always a possibility. I have seen that happen. My dad's been practicing capital litigation for his entire career nearly, and I've seen that before, but I can't say for certain whether that would happen here. It sounds like as of right now, they have filed an intention to seek death in these cases, and so I imagine that is the route they're going for right now.
And I think part of it, honestly, may be the fact that this case is so politically charged, because we have these 2 defendants who are undocumented migrants here. And that brings up the subject of immigration. We now have Jocelyn's mother, who was going along the campaign trail with now President Donald Trump talking about immigration and bringing up this story. And why we're talking about this story today actually is because she just testified this month in Austin about immigration. I mean, does that make it even more, I guess, a hot button topic, the fact that we have this really intense thing with immigration plus everything that happened to the victim?
Yeah, it certainly does, Sierra. And I think to your earlier question of what goes into making the decision whether to seek death, I think while a big part of it here is the facts of this case, I think we have to at least look at the fact that there was an election going on and that there are politics behind the scenes that may have been an influential factor in the state's decision to seek death in this case. So it's definitely a hot button topic when you compile the political issues with immigration on top of this case.
So we had the presidential election. Obviously, everyone knows about that. But in Harris County, too, you were telling me there was an election. So Kim Ogg initially was the DA and announced, yeah, we're going to go forward with the death penalty. But there was an election and now there's a new DA. So could that change things?
Sure, certainly. The new district attorney could change his decision to seek death in this case. And there's a lot of things to keep in mind when going forward on the death penalty. That case is going to linger in the court system for decades through direct appeals and through writs of habeas corpus. It will be a long time, even if there's a conviction, that either defendant would be sentenced to death. And when you have a plea bargain on maybe a reduction to life without parole, it brings finality to the case, which oftentimes is something that the state thinks is more beneficial than seeking death.
That is something we talk about a lot whenever we have a death penalty case, the fact that there could be many appeals and it could go on much longer than, as you said, the finality of life in prison without parole. Definitely an interesting topic at the very least to talk about. But we have talked a lot about the prosecution, the state, what they're bringing. I wanted to talk about the defense too. What do you think is up their sleeves? What are they preparing with right now as this moves forward in the court system?
You know, it's tough to say at this point. Obviously, I haven't been able to look at the entire or any of the defense file really, but I imagine that a lot of things they could do can be challenge search warrants in this case, challenge the scientific evidence in this case. For instance, the DNA that was present that allowed them to connect these defendants to the crime, witness accounts. But even deeper than that, and sort of in the pretrial process, I think that they'll probably do a deep dive into the childhood and decades leading up to this offense of both the defendants in this case to see if there are any mitigating circumstances. And possibly you see a lot of times in capital murder litigation looking for intellectual disability and things like that. So I imagine there are a lot of lawyers on both representing both defendants, and I imagine that both defense teams are making significant efforts both to attack the facts of the case as well as investigate mitigating evidence to try and negotiate better circumstances for these defendants.
You brought up something that has been a question in my head kind of for a while because I've been covering this case since it happened back in June. And back then we reported that DNA was collected, but we didn't have any sort of definitive answer whether it was connected to one or both of the defendants. And in my research for an update on the case, I didn't see anything. I didn't see, yes, it was them. No, it wasn't. Is it possible that that's still being tested, or is it possible that the defense and the prosecution may know and they just haven't made it public? Because I know DNA is something that often prosecutors want to present and say, this person scientifically was here, something for the juries to hang their hats on, put the defendant at the location of the crime. I mean, what do you make of all of that?
Oftentimes, Houston's a big city. There are thousands of cases in the system, thousands of cases which involve DNA at any given time. So it's not uncommon to see a backlog. It's not uncommon for DNA testing to take a matter of months to get completed. I know that there were some issues about a gag order and the parties not speaking publicly about the evidence in the case. And oftentimes you're not going to see the state or the defense really comment on specific pieces of evidence once they're in the pretrial process, because their main focus is maintaining a relationship with the other party involved and advancing the ball for their client. And also for the state's perspective, they want to keep their cards close to the vest. They have to disclose the evidence, but it's not uncommon for them not to put it really in the media.
And I think that does make sense. The fact that they want to keep some of this, as you said, closer to the chest to, I guess, reveal it when it comes time for trial. Something else you mentioned too was witness testimony. So we have a couple of people who may have seen these two in the area at the time. We have a roommate and a boss who say that they may have confessed to part of it. But also in court documents, both of these two defendant spoke separately to investigators. And I know down the line, it'll be up to them to determine whether they actually want to take this stand. That's up to the defendant themselves. But what about the information they've already given to investigators?
Well, that poses difficulties for the defense team. And especially when it comes to deciding, a defendant has the right to testify, but their attorney is going to advise them whether they think that is a good idea or bad idea. And when they take that stand, any deviation from prior statements made to law enforcement can be used to impeach them through a prior inconsistent statement, could call the credibility into question if they were to take the stand. So it's added difficulty. But in certain circumstances, it can provide a defense.
I know that would open them up to the cross-exam too, because I'm sure the defense attorneys would go through and say, here's what I'm going to ask, here's likely what prosecutors are going to say, but you never really know what exactly is going to happen. And that's pretty tense for the defendant on the stand to have to answer these questions with the prosecutor. I mean, it could be a little risky, would you say?
Yes, I think that in a case like this, the district attorney's office is going to have some of their best prosecutors handling the case. These are people that have tried possibly hundreds of murder cases. And so to put a defendant on a death penalty trial, I can't imagine the kind of pressure that defendant would feel at that point in time. I don't anticipate that you would see a defendant testify in these trials just because the stakes are so high and one simple misstatement could really screw up the defense case.
That's usually the way it goes. I just always have to wonder what's going on behind the scenes if we, watching the trial, could actually hear from them, because that's always what I'm interested in. We talked a bit about what the defense may be working on, wondering about the prosecution too. What do you see for the future of this case? Any sort of timeline or how either side is preparing?
I think that it's going to be a long time before we see this case go to trial. Certainly over a year before this case goes to trial. I imagine that while this case is pending, that the state is still working their case up. They don't stop the investigation just because the charge has been filed. I imagine that they're looking for electronic devices that they may be able to use to pinpoint the defendants to the location that they were at, and a number of other things that they're responsible for during the pretrial process. So they've got a long road ahead of them as to the defense, and it will be interesting to see how this all shakes out in the long run.
One thing's for sure, this is a really intense case. And as you said, interesting to see how it's going to turn out. Anthony Osso, thank you so much for coming on with us and walking us through the case.
Thanks for having me, Sierra.
Both suspects are being held on $10 million bond each, plus that immigration hold. That means even if they do post bond, they will still not be released from the Harris County Jail. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.